Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all having a wonderful and amazing day. Today, I bring you the latest and most exciting developments. Are you ready? Finally, Tu Nha's ex-mother-in-law has revealed her true face. After years of silence, she's no longer hiding her dark intentions. Not only does she want to return to Tu Nha's life, but she has a bigger goal. She has decided to take back Henry to snatch Tu Nha's son, no matter the cost. Immediately, she arrived at the farm and began executing her long-planned scheme. There's no hesitation, no second thoughts. In her eyes, everything revolves around one goal: taking Henry back and reclaiming the motherhood she lost. Will she succeed in her plan? Can Tu Nha protect Henry and preserve the happiness she has fought so hard to build? These are the questions we will wait to find the answers to in the upcoming twists. Stay tuned and join me as we follow these thrilling developments. Thank you for your continued support and for being here with me. Tu Nha's life since her ex-mother-in-law reappeared had not been peaceful anymore. Worries and anxiety followed her every day. Every time that woman appeared, old feelings resurfaced and painful memories flooded Tu Nha's heart. She tried to move on, but the fear of the dark schemes of her ex-mother-in-law grew closer and closer, like a ghost that couldn't be driven away. Today, she continued to execute her plan. Sitting on the long bench, she didn't rush carefully, considering every move. She had decided to take back Henry, the child Tu Nha had protected all these years. She had no intention of reconciling or apologizing. Her only goal was to take Henry a right she thought she was entitled to. Her eyes were cold, her face indifferent, as if nothing was at stake. In her mind, there was no remorse or awareness of her past mistakes. She placed all the blame on Tu Nha. It's Tu Nha's fault that Huang An went to prison, and I lost everything: my house, my wealth. Everything disappeared because of her, because she refused to acknowledge the things she had done to Tu Nha. Those words were like sharp arrows piercing Tu Nha without any remorse. She didn't remember the pain she caused, nor did she think about the fact that it was she who pushed Tu Nha out of her life. Everything she did was for her personal gain, regardless of the consequences. She didn't realize that Tu Nha had changed. She was no longer the fragile girl she once was. Tu Nha was now stronger, ready to face any challenge to protect Henry. But the ex-mother-in-law didn't see that change. Every step she took was like the step of a blind person, failing to realize that she herself was the one destroying her own life. She had no remorse for the mistakes she had made, and instead, she continued with her wrongful actions, with a dark plan gradually forming in her mind. She refused to accept the reality that the losses in her life were a result of her own wrong decisions. Instead, she blamed Tu Nha for everything. At this moment, her mind was focused on one goal. First, I will use sweet words to convince Tu Nha to return so I can take my grandchild back home. If that doesn't work, I will use stronger methods to snatch him away. This plan, though seemingly simple, was full of calculation and scheming in her mind. She didn't realize that things had changed too much. Tu Nha was no longer the weak girl who would easily succumb to manipulations, but she continued to misjudge Tu Nha, not recognizing her strength. Without hesitation, she decided to take action immediately. She stood up and headed straight to Tu Nha's house with one clear goal in mind: to take back Henry. She didn't know that while she was planning, Tu Nha was already prepared for whatever might come, no longer easily deceived as before. Both of them were unaware that this confrontation would not only be a fight for Henry's custody, but also a battle of love sacrifice and resilience. Would she succeed in her plan, or would Tu Nha manage to protect what she had built? We will see, but it's clear that this will be a difficult struggle. She had arrived at Tu Nha's house and stood there looking at the closed door. But instead of being patient, she didn't hesitate or feel any discomfort. She boldly approached the door and pushed it open. It seemed that she didn't care about respecting Tu Nha's privacy, only focused on her one goal, to take Henry back. Upon entering, she began calling out, hoping to find Tu Nha, or at least someone who could hear her. But the more she called, the more no one responded. A feeling of frustration welled up inside her, and each shout echoed in the silent house, but there was no reply. She refused to give up and kept calling, hoping for an answer. Gradually, the silence seemed to intensify her irritation and disappointment. Finally, she decided to sit down on a nearby chair, no longer willing to wait any longer. Her anger grew, and she began to mutter to herself. Her eyes were fixed on the house filled with judgment and criticism. How could Tu Nha leave her son in a place like this? Everything around is so poor. Does she really think about Henry? These words kept repeating in her mind, each sentence a sharp arrow stabbing at her heart. She couldn't understand why Tu Nha would choose to live in such dire conditions, and even more so, why she would leave Henry here. In her eyes, everything deserved a different outcome, one that she could control, where the child would come back to her in an environment she deemed better. But as she sat there, waiting and looking around the empty house, she realized there were no signs of Tu Nha returning anytime soon. The feeling of frustration and concern grew. Without anyone at home, she would have to leave without accomplishing her mission. The sense of failure rose within her, but she didn't want to show her disappointment. Finally, she stood up and left her eyes still scanning Tu Nha's house deep in thought. Although she had not succeeded this time, she believed there would be another way to make Tu Nha hand Henry over. Everything was just beginning, and she wouldn't give up so easily. After a long day of shopping and picking up Henry from Mrs. Tang's house, Tu Nha was tired but happy as she thought about returning to her cozy home. She carried with her the food, fruits, and other necessities for the family. When she arrived at the gate, her eyes instinctively stopped when she noticed that the door was wide open, a stark contrast to when she had left earlier. When I left for the market, I made sure to close the door. Could it be the wind? Tu Nha wondered, but the feeling of unease lingered. She stopped for a moment to look around, but there were no obvious signs of danger. Although she felt a little anxious, she convinced herself that it was just an accident. With that thought, Tu Nha continued to walk in without suspecting anything. She passed through the open door without a second thought, unaware that danger was lurking behind her. Everything inside the house was quiet and still, with only the sound of the gentle wind blowing through the cracks in the door. Tu Nha placed the basket down and walked further into the house, feeling lighthearted, completely unaware that someone was watching her every move. Her ex-mother-in-law, the woman who had forced her out of the family, was hiding in the shadows, carefully planning her next move. She hadn't given up on her plan to take Henry back, believing she had the right to do so. Her intentions weren't about mending the relationship with Tu Nha, but rather a power play to regain control of the child. Tu Nha had no idea that her ex-mother-in-law was there. She walked through the house in false peace, unaware that behind the closed door, a carefully prepared scheme was unfolding, one that would shake her calm existence. She moved through each room, completely oblivious to the fact that in just a moment, her peaceful life could be disrupted by someone who refused to let go.
Nhưng cô vẫn tự hỏi liệu mình có thể quay lại cuộc sống cũ, nơi tình yêu và sự quan tâm của Alex đang chờ đợi, hay ở lại nơi này, sống một cuộc sống mới, hoàn toàn không bị ràng buộc. Cả hai im lặng một lúc, chỉ còn hơi thở của họ lấp đầy không gian. Alex vẫn giữ chặt tay trên vai Tử Na, đôi mắt đẫm lệ vì lo lắng, đôi tay run rẩy, sợ mất cô. Em có thể cho anh biết em nghĩ gì không? Em sẽ quay lại với anh chứ? Anh hỏi nhẹ nhàng nhưng đầy hy vọng. Tử Na không biết nói gì, cô chỉ biết cúi đầu, lòng còn đầy nghi ngờ, không muốn làm anh thất vọng, nhưng cô không chắc mình muốn gì. Cô bỏ chạy vì sự ràng buộc, nhưng nhìn vào mắt Alex, cô không thể từ chối tình yêu của anh dành cho mình. Hai người bước về căn nhà nhỏ, ngồi xuống bắt đầu trò chuyện. Không khí thật yên bình, nhưng cũng đang đến lúc cô phải đối mặt với những quyết định quan trọng của cuộc đời cô. Liệu cô ấy có thể trở về nông trại với Alex, nơi tình yêu và sự bình yên đang chờ đón, hay sẽ ở lại đó bắt đầu một cuộc sống mới? Đây là một quyết định quan trọng đối với cô, chỉ là cô chưa có thể đưa ra câu trả lời. Bạn nghĩ sao? Từ nay làm gì? Cô sẽ ở lại với Alex hay tiếp tục cuộc sống ở làng? Chia sẻ những suy nghĩ của mình với